Hello, everybody. This is the Loose Leaf Media Podcast, or as we like to call it, Letterblacks. My name is Davis Leaf. I'm here with my co-host,
Romanus Hutchins.
Hello there.
How are you?
I'm not bad. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
All right, that's great. So today we are going to be reviewing and talking about Alex Garland's new movie, Civil War. And if you don't know who Alex Garland is, he is responsible for, he was the writer for movies like 28 Days Later and the very criminally underrated Sunshine. And then he eventually went on to write and direct films like Ex Machina, Annihilation, Men, and now Civil War. And we are here to talk about it.
Yeah, I'll read a quick summary about the movie.
Yeah.
In Civil War, wartime journalists travel through dystopian America to reach Washington, D.C., as a war between rebel factions and remnants of the U.S. government is undergoing.
Yes, that's a very good introductory summary for the movie, because this movie is a lot. And it has a lot to say, and I like in the last week since it's come out, I have seen various interpretations of this movie, and I think that degree of conversation and discourse I don't think I've seen from most movies this year, and it's been very strong. The discourse for this movie I've seen has been very strong, and I felt very strongly about it, and I just want to get it right out of the bat. I thought it was terrific. I thought it was a magnificent film. Just I'm still piecing a lot of thoughts together on it, and I got a lot to say about it, but how did you feel about the movie?
I saw it 2 days ago, and just right after the movie, I texted you immediately and just said, wow.
Yeah, this guy was crazy.
It blew me away.
Yeah,
no pun intended. The summary that I just read doesn't completely capture the essence of the movie, right? And even from the preview, from the preview, I did feel like maybe there was going to be a lot more violence, a lot more action. But it really is a contained film.
It's not an action movie whatsoever.
Right.
There's a lot of there's a couple of notable set pieces in the movie, specifically the third act of the movie.
Absolutely.
It's one gigantic set piece, and it's fantastic, but it's just intense, and it's a war movie.
Absolutely.
Like, without question, this isn't an action movie. It's a thriller, and it's a war movie. Mm-hmm. It's a semi-fictitious war movie. It's basically painting a portrait of a dystopian future based upon the sensibilities of modern America.
Yes.
And it is disturbing. It is scary. It is very intense. Like, I don't think, like, I'm very glad that the movie is just under 2 hours long, because I don't think I took a single breath watching this movie. It is so intense from start to finish.
Yeah, I'll just say, and maybe I'll talk a little more before we get into spoilers.
Yeah.
But I couldn't agree with you more. The intensity of this movie stems from a lot of the themes just coming from the sensibilities that we see on the news or on social media.
Absolutely.
And of course, this is a government where the democracy has been completely obliterated. Mm-hmm. There are rebel factions everywhere. And there really is no justice system, right? No. There is no law.
It doesn't seem like that, because I mean, I don't we're not going to get into full spoilers yet, but there's like one particular the background of everything that's happening in the movie is expressed almost exclusively through the dialogue, but not in an expository way.
Absolutely.
And the characters having casual conversations. And when, like, the one part where Stephen McKinley Henderson is kind of riffing with Wagner Moura's character, and they're talking about, interview questions, and they're in the car, and he just asks some questions. It's like, what was the decision that led you to disband the FBI?
Yeah.
And that expresses the fact that it's like, there must not be much of a justice system left in this country anymore.
When he said that, and oh my God, I can't wait to we're getting into this movie.
I know.
No, you're right though. There is a lot of exposition that you get from them just talking, and of course, because they're journalists, it it's played well.
It always comes off very naturally.
Yeah.
Because it's like this very natural world building, because the movie thrusts you in at the very tail end of the war.
Right.
This civil war that's like, I don't remember if they specify how long it had been going on for, but it had clearly been going on long enough for the entire country to splinter off into different factions.
Yeah.
Like 4 different factions, it seems like.
Yeah, there's a few. I actually have the map out here.
Yeah, I saw that map. Yeah. The Western forces.
There's the Western forces, the Florida Alliance, the Loyalist States,
and the New People's Army. Yes.
Yeah. But to be honest with you, in the movie, I feel like I only hear about the Western forces.
They mention the Florida Alliance once, but they don't really talk about the Florida Alliance. The very beginning, one of the characters says that the Florida Alliance has failed in like getting the Carolinas to join their kind of alliance or whatever. But it's mostly about the conflict between the Loyalist states and the Western forces.
Yes.
Which it's very important. Like, so I guess we're gonna get into spoilers a little bit now too.
Let's just go ahead.
Look, everybody, go see this movie. It's incredible.
What are you doing?
So crazy. Even if you don't like it, believe me, you're gonna talk about this movie. You're gonna have thoughts about it.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those movies that will make you think, for better or worse. I honestly think it's like probably the most essential film that I've seen this year in terms of like, you shouldn't miss this. You should absolutely go and check this out. But so it's very important to know that the Western forces in this movie are specifically Texas and California. There's like no other states, and they're the most, from what the movie seems to show, the most militarized out of like any of them, because the Loyalists are kind of just like plain clothes with Kevlar on, and they're just regular looking people just fighting against this very militarized group of people that consists of Texas and California that are trying to overthrow this president that managed to get elected for a 3rd term, as you said, just completely obliterates the concept of democracy, and we have gone from a democratic society into a complete fascist society, it seems like, in terms of like the Loyalist states.
Yeah.
And it's such a weird contrast in this movie when you take what, like, without getting too political at this point, you take the states of Texas and California, which have, over history predominantly had some pretty right-wing leaning politics.
Well, Texas is opposed to California, which tends to vote blue.
Exactly.
As a state.
Exactly. And then so you have that contrast, but then you have the Loyalist states who are kind of like in this like fascist position of this government that is just superseding everything, condemning every single one of the other faction locations across America. And then you have Texas and California who have unionized against the Loyalists and are trying to overthrow the government entirely. And I'm like, I feel like a lot of people's sensibilities would say too much of this comes into conflict for it to make any sort of sense. But I firmly believe that is the point of the movie.
Yeah, they don't spoon feed you all of this information. It's not important how all of this came together. Really, what's important is the ending, and these journalists who are trying to just capture the end of the American government as we know it. So if you get into the exact origin of the Western forces or the exact origin of the Florida Alliance, you're probably missing the point.
You're overthinking it way too much. Yeah, it's not the point.
And I'll say this, even in some of the movie where you actually see soldiers, to be honest with you, there were times when people were fighting and I had no idea which side they were on.
I felt that too. Right? And it helps when you're showcasing it through the lens of these photojournalists that are just trying to capture the war in any way that they can and wherever they can.
Exactly.
Because it's their duty ultimately as journalists to tell this story and not, I mean, there's a huge commentary on like, political neutrality in this movie too.
Yes.
And the dangers of inflicting blame on those who remain politically neutral, as well as the dangers of remaining politically neutral.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of this movie is not to sit there and think about who are the good guys and who are the bad guys.
Yeah.
Because once you do that, it does all start to fall apart. The entire idea is to recognize the dangers of polarization. Mm-hmm. And that is like a direct quote that I saw in an interview with Alex Garland. And I have my own additional interpretations of it, but I firmly believe that is a strong point that's being made in this movie. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, I just think it's brilliant because it makes you think, but don't overthink it either.
Yeah.
Don't expect this movie to be making some sort of a strong political statement. It's a commentary, if anything, on just all the sensibilities of how everybody is ultimately feeling right now and the dangers of staying divisive and staying polarized. Like opposition is what ultimately is going to breed factionalism.
Yeah, I think the scene that captures that in a way is the one where the main characters are driving and they see a little like Christmas decorations on a road and they start driving down the road and then their car, gets fired upon by a sniper. They don't know what direction, but they drive for cover. They get out of the truck and they happen upon, two other soldiers that are trying to kill the sniper that's hiding in a house nearby that just shot at everybody. And one of the main characters, Joel is asking the two soldiers, "Who are you with?" And the two soldiers are like, "Who gives a fuck, dude?
Exactly.
We are being fired upon.
They're trying to kill us,
yes.
So we're trying to kill them.
Yes.
It's as simple as that.
Exactly.
Which side we are on does not matter, and they don't specify that.
Yeah.
They don't specify whether like they're Western forces or they're loyalists, and there's like hints every now and then to indicate like which side is supposed to be which from time to time. There's like I don't know. There are these weird like. Do you remember that scene in the movie where? It's kind of like the first firefight scene that we see when they're like documenting them trying to get this one soldier that's pinned down, and it ultimately fails, and then Callie Spaney managed to capture her masterpiece of a picture of them trying to administer health to this guy that was shot.
Yeah,
and there's like there are these painted stripes in the shot right behind her on the wall.
Yes, yeah,
and the same colors are seen on those soldiers that they talk to.
Yeah.
And I think those were supposed to be the loyalist fighters, but again, it's context clues that gives us that. It's not the characters explicitly saying that, and that's what I also find interesting. Because the characters aren't interested in specifying sides, but there are hints that indicate, like, if you must know, this is what side is which at times. And Kirsten Dunst, who is just fantastic in this movie.
Absolutely.
Maybe my favorite performance of hers of all time.
Yeah.
Her character also speaks to one of the best points of the movie, which has to do with the ethics of war photography. And she says, when Callie Spaney, her character, is trying to figure out why she froze when trying to take a picture at one point in the movie, and then Kirsten Dunst just kind of like reassures her, like, you can't do that. Once you start asking yourself these kinds of questions, you'll never be able to stop.
Right. That's
why we do what we do, so that other people ask these questions and feel influenced to do something about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. What I'll say is that there was the scene where, what's the older black gentleman's name?
His character name was Sammy.
Sammy, okay. So there's a point where Lee and Sammy are sitting on the couch, just outside watching a battle go on in the background, and Lee talks about how she thought that she was sending back her photos from war back home as a warning, to say don't do this.
Yeah,
right. So no, you're absolutely right. There's Kirsten Dunst does such a great job depicting this very jaded wartime photographer who is just beginning to question, like, what is this all for? What was all of this work done for if the country where I'm from is in this state right now?
Absolutely.
Man, God, this movie was fantastic.
It was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And so, yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the themes of the movie and everything. Yeah, it's like huge commentary on just political neutrality and photojournalism ethics, which are the two biggest things I picked up from the movie, and I think those are very strong in the way that Alex Garland chooses to depict these themes is very, very good and concise, doesn't beat you over the head, and I've seen so many critics. I honestly feel like, I feel like I lost a lot of faith in critics' ability to view a film without inflicting their own personal politics into the viewing experience, because it is a very political movie. I'm not going to say it makes a lot of political statements, but it commentates on a lot of political ideologies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people seem to have taken a very strong issue with the film's unwillingness to, quote, pick a side.
Really?
And I think that is kind of the biggest point that the movie's making.
Absolutely.
Is subscribing to that notion is very dangerous. And when you force yourself to pick a side, you'll eventually lose track of which side you're even fighting for in the first place and become as cynical and jaded as the character of Kirsten Dunst in the movie Lee Smith.
Yeah.
And you kind of notice the flip that Callie Spaney and Kirsten Dunst's characters do. Yeah, in the third act, where she starts to regain a sense of her humanity by the end and recognize just how terrible all of this chaos is. And Callie Spaney just cannot help but revel in the spectacle of everything. Yeah. And that, and the way it ends, is so dark and sinister, honestly.
It is.
That it's I'm still kind of trying to reconcile with how I feel perfectly about the ending. I think it's brilliant, and it's open-ended, but it speaks to the case that Lee Smith also says earlier in the movie, or I don't know if she said it or another character does, but the fact that, like, when the Western forces get what they want, everyone will just turn on each other anyway.
Sammy says that.
Yeah, Sammy does. Yeah. There is no true end to this war, ultimately. Mm-hmm. There's just their end to it. But then something else starts up. I mean, their objective clearly at the very end of this movie was just to do nothing but kill the president.
Yeah. Oh, wow. We're really getting into spoilers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's spoilers. That's what happens.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That let's get into the third act. You see that they have made it to Washington D.C. and the Western forces have infiltrated D.C. and the remnants of the Secret Service.
Absolutely.
And then I guess other forces that are aligned with the president. And
it's chaos.
It's utter chaos.
It's noise. It's explosive.
The Lincoln Memorial is completely destroyed.
I love that sequence because there's like no sound in that moment.
Yeah.
When we see when we enter Washington D.C. and the firefight in the streets is ensuing, we just cut straight to two different sides shooting at each other from the Lincoln Memorial and from below it. And then they just fire a huge javelin rocket right at the memorial, and it blows half of it up, and it's just all muffled.
Yeah.
You don't hear the sound, you just see the visuals, and it's just like, that just added to the intensity to me. I mean, I was horrified watching all of it, because I'm just sitting here thinking, it's like, you and I, we live here.
We live 20 minutes away
from all of this. And we're just watching this entire city that we live in be completely decimated by this civil war. And it's horrifying to actually watch. And it's like, this is like, if something like this were to happen, there's no better way that this is exactly how it would look. Mm-hmm. It would be this cataclysmic.
Yeah, this movie is so grounded in reality, especially since the January 6th riots, right? Mm-hmm. Like, of course, the January 6th riots wasn't a war.
No, but I mean, the movie does not shy on using terms like the insurrectionists, almost right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And, despite how you may feel about the whole January 6th incident, I mean, you can't help but notice that was one of the inciting inspirations, clearly, for this movie.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't know how long Alex Garland was working and writing on this, but, there's a timeliness to the movie that you just cannot ignore whatsoever. It was almost kind of like watching Trial of the Chicago 7 only a mere months after the George Floyd riots had happened, where you're just like, wow, the timing of this is so good.
Yeah.
It's like to the point where it's like, yeah, we needed to see a film like this.
They should have released this in August, just right before the election. You know,
that would have been so funny.
Maybe even October. Well, well, it has to compete with Halloween movies, but
yeah. But I mean, this is a horror movie. I mean, if you ask me, this movie. Now let's talk about something. Let's talk about like the scene. I think of this movie.
Oh yeah.
I don't think I don't think that it needs much of an introduction, but you know the scene.
I do.
When Jesse fucking Plemons makes a 5-minute appearance in this movie, and literally. It's one of the scariest scenes I've ever seen in a movie in my entire life. I don't think I've seen a horror movie in years where a scene scared me more than that scene does in this movie.
And he was actually cast very late, just like a day before they were supposed to shoot, because the person who was originally cast in the role just dropped out. And so Kirsten Dunst Jesse
called her husband and was like, "Yo, right? I need you to be in this movie as a white nationalist, real quick."
And he played it well. He is a convincing white nationalist.
He very much is, without hesitation. And that scene was too long because it's too freaking scary.
Yeah.
The minute that he just pops the first guy was the minute, like, I was already like so tense and so jittery at that point, but when that moment happens and not a single amount of music, nothing to build up the scene, it's just characters sitting there as the tension builds. And I don't know how Garland did this, but this is probably one of the best scenes in which tension, like the best examples of tension building in a scene that I've seen in so long.
Well, you know, like you bring up a good point. I think the tension, you can cut it with a knife in this movie since the beginning. I mean,
I agree.
Right, like the first scene, Nick Offerman, who plays the president, of what's that show he's off of? Parks and Rec, of Parks and Rec fame. If you don't know, he's Ron Swanson.
One of the.
How did I know that? I've not seen a lot of.
You've never seen Parks and Rec?
I've seen it. It's been so long. But anyway, so
it's one of my favorite sitcoms. So
yuck. Anyway,
you don't like Parks and Rec? Okay,
it's just not as funny as The Office.
I highly disagree with that.
Well, I highly disagree with you.
That's fine, because I hate The Office. So
God damn it. No, I should have said fuck you.
Yeah, no, feel free, please. That's actually interesting.
So at the beginning of the movie, you see Nick Offerman addressing the country, you know, on the news.
Yep.
And you only see him not on the news necessarily. You see him in person, and he's getting ready to address the country, and he's going over his lines and just trying to reinstill positivity and confidence in whoever is still his allies. But you can tell that he doesn't even believe himself. He's also desperate. He's also worried about the future.
It's the tail end of the war,
right?
Like, the loyalist states are clearly at the most desperate, especially since the Western forces have pushed like only mere miles outside of DC territory.
Yeah, and I think, and even the next scene where Kirsten Dunst is going to a protest. You know, there's police there. There's you know, just anything that you probably would see on the news, maybe during the pandemic, just all these protests. And there is a suicide bomber who runs with the American flag in tow,
right into the crowd,
and just kills a ton of people. And it's so shocking and alarming.
And like, the explosion is so massive and loud, and then it cuts out, and then we see like Callie Spaney's character, her point of view, and then there's this brilliant shot that, like, the cinematography is so meticulous in this movie. It looks fantastic.
It has to be.
But there's this brilliant shot because it's like we see the first like kind of incident happening in the movie are these riots happening in New York, and you just see the NYPD in conflict with a bunch of desperate people.
Yeah.
And then after the explosion happens, you just see Lee shielding. I don't remember Callie Spaney's character's name.
Jesse.
Yeah. You see Lee shielding Jesse after the explosion, and you just see her hand right on the side of an NYPD car, just directly in frame, the motto of the NYPD of protect and served, honor, respect. And I'm just like, that type of imagery and symbolism is everywhere in this movie. And I think it's meant to be just so contrasting and ironic most of the time when you just see the entire country in conflict with itself, where nobody can agree, and you have all of these figures of authority who have absolutely zero control of this situation.
Yeah.
And it's just such great imagery throughout the entire movie that just showcases everything is out of control in this country. There is nothing that is working for anybody anymore.
So here's the thing. I want to contrast that just because in the next scene when they're, or a few scenes later when they're about to get ready to get on their journey, right? That morning, we see that New York is just quiet. There are no cars. But then you have a group of people riding their bikes in just the empty streets of New York. As a like just,
and then they're escorted by like military Humvees and things like that too.
Yes, yeah, but it also just shows that there are a few just kernels of people trying to live their lives in the midst of this conflict in the country, right? Like even Lee and Jesse's parents, they both talk about how my parents are somewhere in Missouri or Colorado,
just pretending
like none of this is happening, right? It's just like it's very just interesting how the movie tries to find ways for people to still make some sort of a life out of all this chaos.
But at the same time, it perfectly commentates on like the ignorance, the true ignorance that people want to uphold for themselves, and like it's understandable in a lot of ways because it's like these concepts fully culminate during like that halfway point in the movie when they just like go through that small town, and you just see everybody just casually living their lives as if nothing wrong is happening and nothing's going on, and it baffles all the lead characters, and they simply say it's just like, well, we just try to stay out of whatever we see on the news, and it's like, I hear that from just regular people, like pretty all the time
absolutely.
too. That's just how people behave now too.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't expect everybody to just change and have different kinds of sensibilities, even if a civil war was happening in country. Those certain secluded or isolated areas throughout the country where people can just live blissfully ignorant, they would still probably exist in a lot of ways if the war isn't directly touching or impacting them.
Absolutely.
That's just how people are, and that's just how people think. And Garland really wants to emphasize just like every point of view in terms of if a situation like this would happen. And the point of the movie is just not whatsoever to take sides. And that is one of the brilliant aspects of this movie. It can be as terrifying and as scary and have a lot to say about, being apolitical and different types of ethics in terms of photojournalism. But at the end of the day, it's trying to tell a story about the dangers of where we go if left unchecked.
Yeah. This is another home run for him.
I agree.
And he's quickly becoming one of my favorite directors.
I honestly might call this my favorite movie of his at this point. I mean, I have a pretty high love for Ex Machina, which I watched shortly before I went and saw this movie. And I like in terms of his writing, I really love Sunshine. Sunshine is definitely up there for me as well. But I just think, I don't know if there's been a movie that I've seen from him that's made me think as deeply and has had the most to say as much as this movie. And for that reason, I just respect it the most, and I might call this right now my favorite movie of his.
I really enjoyed it. There was not a second where my heart wasn't pounding.
No, it's so tense, and like going back to the Jesse Plemons scene, it's just like, honestly, that scene traumatized me in so many ways. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's brutal. It's so terrifying. It's like just those last seconds after he like just pops the other guy, and that's when it's just like, oh my god, he's gonna fucking kill us all at this point. Just that moment scares the shit out of me, and then Sammy comes in, saves their asses,
saves the day.
And
the magical Negro,
exactly. Like you gotta love it. You gotta love it. And then just that moment when both Joel and Jesse just jump into the back of the car. They drive off, and then it just cuts to them hyperventilating and looking at each other. There's no sound. It's just the high pitch just getting louder and louder and louder, and you just see their faces just screaming so loudly, but you cannot hear their screams. You just hear the high pitch of everything, of them just reeling from everything that just happened, and it's just terrifying because you feel every emotion they're feeling in that moment. And then God, the acting is so good in this movie too. From the 4 leads,
absolutely,
they are all so goddamn good throughout this entire movie.
You hit the nail right on the head. The sound design is incredible.
It's so good in this movie,
and even the points where they choose to be silent, right? And I think it's just to draw attention to, or just to not draw attention away from what you should be paying attention to. I'll give you an example. When right after the first action set piece where they're with the Western forces,
whoever
right, it really doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
And it's the execution scene, right? They have the 3 guys in uniform. They have hoods on so they don't see anything, and they take them into a field, and then a guy on the distance has like basically a Gatling gun, just some huge gun, and is gunning down,
just mowing them down.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there's music over.
Let's talk about those needle drops in this movie too, because the freaking needle drops in this movie are great.
What's the needle drop?
Like the four songs that play throughout the movie.
Yeah.
But during that scene, we get that De La Soul track.
Oh yeah.
And like that's great.
Yeah.
I love the needle drops in this movie. They're so well done.
But to the scene where Jesse's character is just watching this execution happen, right? Should be just very jarring to anybody, but she's already seen. She took a picture of a man die in someone else's arm. This is her first real action as a wartime journalist. And as she's watching that, Lee is watching in the distance.
Yeah.
As the background in Lee's shot is just a burning building. It's just completely engulfed in black smoke,
and she's not the center frame either in that shot. She looks like
she's on the side.
She's like on the corner, like the upper corner. On
exactly.
The side. Yeah.
The building is the center.
Exactly, and it looks awesome.
It's fantastic. And Lee just turns back and looks at the building, just not looking at Jesse anymore. You talked earlier about that wall that was colored.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like there's a theme of how people lose their innocence during war.
Probably.
Because even, and you talked about how the two the guy in the sniper scene, the 2 guys also had colors on them too. They look like maybe 18, the early 20s, maybe like 24. Just
Absolutely.
how like I really think that a huge part of this movie is about Jesse's innocence and how she sort of like just how Lee is gaining her humanity back. Jesse is almost losing hers.
She's losing it,
right?
And she does by the very end.
Yeah,
because it's all about getting the perfect shot.
In
those last few minutes of the movie,
she completely disregards her own safety in order to get the best shot, and
then she disregards the major loss that she just had. In favor of getting the perfect shot. And that's when the movie ends.
Everyone does, right? Because even you saw earlier in the movie that Joel was just distraught about how his 3 friends died, Sammy and the 2 Asian guys. But then when it looks like Lee has been killed, all that matters is that he gets the final quote from the president, right? So yeah,
because he wanted to ensure he could do it, like just so Sammy wouldn't have died for nothing ultimately,
right?
And he probably felt similarly after Lee gets it too.
Sure, but and maybe all of this, or at least a part of this movie, was about is that during war we all lose our innocence. We're all losing something. It really doesn't matter what side you are.
It becomes survival of the fittest in a lot of ways too.
Yeah,
it's like either you kill them or they kill you. Like what are you gonna do ultimately? And most people don't know and can't experience that. Can't understand. So I mean, yeah, the cinematography is just absolutely incredible in this movie. The acting is just incredible. I don't think that there's the movie is absolutely worth probably picking apart in a lot of ways because it is very complex.
Yeah.
And it does have a lot to say. And that's why I find it so interesting that a movie about the dangers of polarization is polarizing. Yeah. Like very, very polarizing.
It shocked me that a lot of people are upset with this movie. I would think
people are personally offended by this movie. It's kind of crazy.
There's tons of controversy with the trailer. There's controversies with how it was promoted.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what to say to people.
I don't either.
Just go to the movie and watch a good movie.
Check it out. You'll be thinking about it. It's a shame. I do not anticipate this movie getting like any recognition from any awards by next year.
Yeah.
I think it is way too controversial for that, which is like a lot of movies that get that kind of recognition are controversial too. Mm-hmm. But like I think this is just like people are not willing. They don't want to acknowledge just how much this movie is saying and just how much what this movie is trying to do. And I think there's a spectrum in which I think people are saying that this movie is saying too much and people are saying that it's saying too little. And
wow, that's so shocking.
This is why I believe in like the commentary on its political neutrality ultimately, because it's saying a lot about pretty much everybody's sensibilities about war and the current state of affairs of our country.
Yeah. It's so like I went to college in Missouri, University of Missouri.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that were said in this movie I heard at my 4 years in Missouri.
Interesting.
So, and even just Jesse Plemonson's character, where he's basically trying to evaluate how American the lead characters are before, killing them. Even though the action is more violent in this movie.
Oh, it's brutal. It's brutal. It's as brutal as like Black Hawk Down or Saving Private Ryan. It's a legit war movie.
It is, but I still feel like in some of those movies you have antagonists who are maybe a bit out of there, right? Like in what's the movie with Charlie Sheen?
Oh, Platoon.
Yeah. Okay, that movie is fucked up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it is.
In Civil War, Jesse Plemons is fair. Yeah. In Civil War, Jesse Plemons is as an antagonist. That character, he's more real.
No, he feels real. Like
he feels real, and I've seen people
nationalists like that. They're waiting for shit like this.
They are waiting for shit like this. They exist.
You just see them dumping a freaking truck of majority people of colored bodies into a huge pit.
Mass grave.
Yep, and then putting Lyle over it. It's just like, that is some Nazi ass shit right there.
And I think that we've just seen, everyone has seen people like him, maybe without a rifle, but people who are evaluating how American a person is, where maybe they're white, heteronormative, Christian, maybe from the Midwest, definitely don't have an accent from, South America, just like, and they're maybe not going to kill you, but certainly going to have some sort of aggression, maybe micro or macro.
Absolutely.
No, fantastic movie.
Incredible. Yeah. Just through and through, from start to finish, Alex Garland has absolutely done it again.
Yeah.
I am, I hear what he's going to be doing next is he's linking back up with Danny Boyle for 28 years later.
28 years later.
And if that's happening, Cillian Murphy apparently is going to be coming back.
He is, yeah.
And that's got to be one of my most anticipated movies then, if that is actually about to happen.
I think 2026.
I'll wait.
Yeah?
I'll wait for it.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm waiting for a few movies.
Yeah, we got plenty before then, but that's going to be up there for like ones I'm looking forward to the most, because I think Garland has reached a pretty good height for himself. Seeing him come back as writer for another 28 movie with Danny Boyle making it, and then Cillian Murphy returning for it, that'll get people in seats.
No, yeah, the trifecta for me, Annihilation, Ex Machina, now Civil War.
Facts.
It really, I would say that there hasn't been many new directors where I am just anticipating their next movie, but for him, he's becoming that for me.
I agree. At this point, I just think, he's clearly going to be doing something pretty substantial and interesting, like whenever he does something. So Garland he's on his way to becoming a household name now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with this movie, maybe for good or for bad. Yeah. Who knows?
I heard that it was like the most profitable weekend for an A24 movie ever. So,
by the way, A24, they can't miss, man.
No,
have they made a bad movie?
Yeah.
Have they?
But I think the margin for their bad films is pretty small.
And
like they're a pretty reliable production and distribution company.
Yeah.
So,
maybe the most reliable.
Maybe. That would be great.
Right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime I see a trailer from him drop, I'm just like, oop, that looks interesting at the very least. Yeah.
Well, there was one maybe. So are we just going to end the review and maybe talk about other things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, go see Civil War.
Go see Civil War, baby.
It's really good.
Yeah.
This was the Loose Leaf Media Podcast.